I should start by saying that I am not proud of what I am about to share. Stories like mine are rarely told without judgment. That's why I have chosen to remain anonymous. I'm not here to seek sympathy or even forgiveness. I am here to confess, to put into words the dangerous affair I had with my personal assistant at work. It was the kind of infidelity that changes the way you look at yourself in the mirror. The kind of story that sounds like it belongs in some cheap romance novel, except it happened to me, in real offices, during real workdays, while I was still married. It didn't happen overnight. Affairs rarely do. They creep in like shadows, slowly stretching until they cover everything. For me, it started with her smile. Her name doesn't matter, but for the sake of this story, I'll call her Clara. She came to my office as a replacement after my old assistant left for a better paying job. I wasn't excited about the transition at first. Training a new assistant always felt like starting from zero. But the moment Clara walked into my office on her first day, something shifted. She wasn't just another employee. She carried herself differently, confident but not arrogant, professional but with an energy that felt alive, warm, and magnetic. She wore a navy blue skirt that stopped just above her knees, paired with a crisp white blouse. The look was formal, but the way the fabric shaped itself around her body stirred something in me I hadn't felt in years. I had been married for over a decade at that point. My wife and I were fine, or at least, that's what I told myself. We lived in the same house, shared the same bed, and even laughed occasionally. But the fire that once defined us had long burned out. Nights were more about scrolling our separate phones than touching each other. So when Clara smiled at me that morning, shaking my hand and saying, "I'm looking forward to working with you, sir," I felt a twinge of something I thought was long gone. At first, it was harmless. She was efficient, reliable, and organized. She handled schedules with precision, managed clients like a pro, and kept my day flowing smoother than it had in months. But outside of her professionalism, there was an ease about her that drew me in. She laughed freely at my dry jokes. She remembered the way I liked my coffee. She stayed a little later than necessary when deadlines were heavy, and I noticed the way her perfume lingered in the office after she left, a subtle, floral scent that refused to let go. One late evening, after most of the staff had gone home, I found myself watching her work at her desk. The glow of her computer screen painted her face in soft blues, and she was biting her lip as she typed. Something about that sight unlocked a door I should have left closed. "Clara," I said, trying to sound casual, "you don't always have to stay this late. I can handle the rest." She looked up at me, her eyes warm. "I don't mind. Besides, I'd rather finish things now than leave a mess for tomorrow." Her dedication was admirable, but there was something else in her voice. Something unspoken, a silence between words that hinted at curiosity, maybe even desire. From then on, I started noticing her in ways I shouldn't have. The way her laughter carried through the halls. The way her blouse sometimes clung to her skin when she hurried in from the rain. The way her hand brushed mine when we reached for the same file. These weren't accidents, they were invitations, even if neither of us dared to admit it out loud. The turning point came one Friday evening. My wife had texted me earlier, saying she was heading to her sister's for the weekend. That meant an empty house. That also meant I wasn't in a rush to leave work. Clara was there too, finishing up reports. The office was unusually quiet, just the hum of the air conditioning and the tapping of her keyboard. At some point, I walked over to check a file she had printed. She stood up as I reached her desk, and for a brief moment, we were standing far too close. I could feel the warmth of her body, smell her perfume again, see the slight nervous flicker in her eyes. "You're doing really well here," I told her, my voice lower than I intended. "Thank you," she replied, and then added with a smirk, "You're not so bad yourself." That smirk, it undid me. It was playful but loaded with something much heavier. My hand lingered on the desk beside hers. Her fingers brushed against mine, and neither of us pulled away. That tiny touch sent electricity straight through me. A simple, almost innocent gesture, but in that moment, I knew we had crossed a line. We didn't kiss that night. We didn't even say anything more than good night. But as I drove home to my empty house, my thoughts weren't on my wife or my family. They were on Clara, on the way her hand had felt against mine, on the smirk that seemed to linger even in memory. That was the night I admitted to myself what I already knew, I wanted her. The following week was torture. Every meeting, every shared glance, every accidental brush of hands felt like it was loaded with explosives. My rational side screamed at me to stop before it was too late. But my body, my heart, my ego, they wanted more. The truth is, infidelity doesn't start with sex. It starts with attention, with someone making you feel seen again. And Clara saw me in a way my wife hadn't in years. One afternoon, she came into my office with a stack of files. She leaned over my desk to place them in front of me, and I swear she did it slower than necessary. Her blouse shifted, and I caught myself staring. She noticed. She didn't cover herself. Instead, she let the moment stretch. Our eyes met, and that was when everything changed. The Monday after that charged moment in my office, everything felt different. On the surface, Clara and I carried on with the same professional routine. She handed me reports, managed phone calls, updated schedules, and smiled politely in meetings. But beneath it all, there was an unspoken understanding between us. Every glance was heavier, every touch lingered just a fraction longer than it should have. It was as though the air itself had thickened, charged with a tension that neither of us could ignore. I tried convincing myself it was harmless. I told myself I was imagining it, that Clara was simply being a good assistant and I was reading too much into it because of the emptiness I felt in my marriage. But deep down, I knew better. You don't lean that close to someone's desk by accident. You don't let your fingers rest on someone else's hand if you don't want them to notice. And you don't smirk the way she had smirked at me unless you're fully aware of what you're doing. That week stretched on like a rubber band pulled too tight. By Wednesday, I felt like I was going to snap. My wife had been distant again, barely speaking at dinner, more invested in her phone than in me. It was a marriage by routine, nothing more. And yet, despite knowing all of this, part of me still felt guilty. I hadn't done anything wrong yet, but in my mind, I already had. Thursday evening, the office emptied out earlier than usual. Clara was still at her desk, finishing up, while I sat in my office pretending to read through documents. In reality, I was watching the clock, aware that every minute that passed made it harder for me to resist walking out to her. When I finally did, she looked up from her desk, surprised but smiling. "Still here?" she asked. "Same to you," I replied. "I just didn't feel like heading home yet," she said, almost too casually. Neither did I. I leaned against the doorway, arms folded, trying to keep my composure. "Long day," she nodded. "Yeah, but productive." There was a pause then, a silence that was anything but empty. She shifted in her seat, her eyes meeting mine and then darting away. I stepped closer, slower than necessary, until I was standing on the other side of her desk. "Clara," I said softly, "you know, you don't have to stay late just for me." Her lips curled into that same dangerous smirk. "Maybe I'm not staying just for work." Those words hit me like a jolt of lightning. Before I could even process them, she stood up, and suddenly we were close again, closer than we had ever been. I could feel the warmth of her body, see the rapid rise and fall of her chest. I should have walked away. I should have reminded myself that I had a wife waiting at home, that this was a line I couldn't uncross. But instead, I leaned in. Our lips met in a kiss that was both hesitant and desperate at the same time. For a moment, it felt surreal, like something out of a dream. But when her hands moved to my shoulders and mine slid instinctively around her waist, reality hit me full force. This was happening. The kiss deepened quickly. What started as a tentative brush of lips turned into something heated, urgent. Her fingers curled into my shirt, pulling me closer, while I felt the warmth of her body pressing against mine. Every suppressed desire, every unspoken thought, every silent tension of the past weeks exploded in that single moment. When we finally broke apart, both of us were breathing hard. Clara looked at me with wide eyes, her cheeks flushed. "We shouldn't," she whispered, though her grip on my shirt didn't loosen. "I know," I said, my voice hoarse. "But I can't stop." Neither could she. That night, nothing more happened. We kissed, we touched, we lingered in the forbidden space of desire, but we stopped before crossing the final boundary. She left first, her hair slightly messy, her lips swollen from our kisses. I stayed behind, sitting in my office chair, staring at the ceiling, trying to come to terms with what I had just done. I had officially cheated, maybe not in the physical sense that most people imagine, but emotionally, I had crossed the line. I had given a piece of myself to someone who wasn't my wife. And I knew there was no going back. The days that followed were worse than before. Now, whenever I saw Clara, all I could think about was the taste of her lips, the heat of her touch. We tried to act normal at work, but the charade cracked easily. I'd catch her staring at me when she thought I wasn't looking. She'd find excuses to step into my office more often than necessary. The dam finally broke the following Friday. It was another late evening, work piling up, the rest of the office empty. Clara came into my office carrying a stack of documents, closing the door behind her without even being asked. "Do you want me to file these now, she began, but her voice trailed off when she saw the way I was looking at her. I don't even remember standing up. All I remember is crossing the room and kissing her again, harder this time, more desperate. She dropped the papers onto the desk without care, her arms wrapping around me instantly. This time, we didn't stop. The office became our secret world, hidden behind locked doors and drawn blinds. The sound of her breath in my ear, the feel of her nails against my back, the way she whispered my name as though it were a secret she'd been dying to say, all of it consumed me. For the first time in years, I felt alive. Desired. Seen. When it was over, we sat there in silence, both of us trying to catch our breath, the weight of what we'd done settling over us like a heavy blanket. Clara looked at me, her eyes searching. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that I didn't regret it, not in that moment. My guilt would come later, when I drove home to my wife and pretended everything was normal. But sitting there with Clara, still feeling the warmth of her body, regret was the furthest thing from my mind. That was the night the affair truly began. And once it started, it was impossible to stop. Once you cross a line like the one Clara and I crossed, there's no going back. That's something I learned quickly. The first time feels like an accident, a mistake you can still undo. The second time feels like a decision. And after the third, fourth, and fifth, it becomes a routine. By the time 2 months had passed, Clara and I had settled into an unspoken rhythm of secrecy. At work, we were careful. On the surface, nothing looked suspicious. She still called me, sir, in front of others, still maintained her professionalism. But the stolen glances, the subtle touches, and the way her voice softened when we were alone said otherwise. The office became our playground. A locked door here, a late night there, it was dangerous, and that danger only fueled the fire. I'd call her into my office under the pretense of discussing schedules, and within minutes, she'd be perched on my desk, her lips on mine. Sometimes we didn't even bother with excuses, we just let the chemistry pull us in, both knowing the risk of being caught but unable to stop ourselves. One particular afternoon still burns in my memory. It was a Wednesday, the kind of day where everything was dragging. Most of the staff had gone out for a long lunch, and the office was unusually quiet. Clara came in to drop off some documents, and the way she closed the door behind her told me everything I needed to know. "You're reckless," I whispered as I pulled her into my arms. She smirked, her lips brushing against mine. "And you love it." She wasn't wrong. The thrill of being with her, knowing we could be interrupted at any moment, was intoxicating. My heart raced not just from desire, but from fear. And yet, every time I told myself this has to be the last time, I found myself craving her even more. But it wasn't just the physical side of things that drew me in. Clara had a way of making me feel alive again. She laughed at my jokes, asked about my day, and actually listened. She noticed when I was stressed and found ways to ease it, whether through a thoughtful word or a touch on my shoulder that lingered longer than necessary. She filled a void I hadn't even realized had grown so wide inside of me. The contrast between her and my wife was impossible to ignore. At home, conversations with my wife were transactional, about bills, groceries, and the kids. Our bedroom had turned into a space for sleep and nothing else. I don't say this to justify what I did, I say it because it was the reality that made what I did possible. Clara reminded me of who I used to be, the man who could still feel desired, the man who still believed passion had a place in his life. One Friday, Clara and I took our recklessness outside the office for the first time. I had suggested it, nervous but excited, and she agreed without hesitation. We told the staff we had a client meeting across town, and instead, we checked into a discreet hotel where no one would recognize us. Walking into that room with her felt surreal. It wasn't like the hurried encounters in my office, filled with the fear of being caught. Here, we had time, privacy, freedom. She kicked off her heels by the door and laughed, saying she hadn't felt this alive in years. I knew exactly what she meant. That afternoon was different. It wasn't rushed or frantic. It was slow, deliberate, filled with the kind of intimacy I hadn't experienced in over a decade. Afterward, we lay there in silence, her head resting on my chest, my hand tracing circles on her back. "This is dangerous," she whispered. I know, I replied, kissing her forehead. But I don't want to stop. Neither did I. The hotel became a regular escape for us after that. Once a month, sometimes twice, we'd invent a reason to leave the office and disappear for a few hours. Each time, it felt more like an addiction. I knew I was in too deep. But the thought of ending it filled me with dread. Of course, with routine came risk. One afternoon, after Clara left my office with her hair slightly disheveled and her lipstick smudged, one of my colleagues raised an eyebrow. "Long meeting," he joked. I forced a laugh, but my heart raced. It was a reminder that as careful as we tried to be, people noticed things. And if my colleagues could notice, then one day my wife might too. That fear kept me awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long I could keep living this double life. Still, the next morning, when Clara brushed her hand against mine while handing me a file, I forgot all about fear. I forgot about guilt. All I saw was her. Looking back now, I realize how dangerous it was, not just because of the risk of being caught, but because of how dependent I became on her. Clara wasn't just my assistant anymore. She was my confidant, my escape, my secret. And in some twisted way, she became the one thing keeping me sane. One night, after another stolen afternoon together, I asked her if she ever felt guilty. She hesitated, then said, "Sometimes. But when I'm with you, it feels right." Her words echoed in my mind for days. They made me question everything. If being with her felt so right, why did it have to be wrong? Why did marriage have to mean the end of passion? Why couldn't I have both? I didn't have answers then, and I still don't. All I knew was that the more time I spent with Clara, the harder it became to imagine life without her. By the end of the third month, our affair was no longer a secret we stumbled into, it was a full-blown relationship, hidden from the world but all-consuming for us. And though part of me knew it couldn't last forever, another part of me prayed it never had to end. The first few months with Clara felt like living in a dream. Everything was charged with adrenaline, the secrecy, the stolen kisses, the thrill of being desired again. But dreams, no matter how sweet, have a way of souring once reality pushes through. The shift was subtle at first. It started with Clara asking small questions that carried heavier weight than she intended. "Will you ever tell her? Do you think about me when you're home? What are we, really?" They were questions I didn't want to answer, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't want to face the truth. What were we, really? Two people caught in a dangerous game? Lovers hiding in plain sight? Or just two lonely souls filling gaps in each other's lives? The truth was complicated. I loved my wife once, and part of me still did. We had built a life together, children, a home, a history too deep to erase. But Clara had awakened something in me that I thought was long gone. With her, I felt alive, wanted, seen. She wasn't just a fling anymore. She was becoming something more. And that scared me. One evening, after another of our hotel escapes, Clara turned to me as we lay tangled in sheets, her hair spread across the pillow. She looked at me with those sharp, searching eyes. "Do you ever imagine us, outside of this? Like, in the real world?" Her question froze me. I kissed her forehead to avoid answering directly, but she pressed again. "I mean it. What if your wife found out? Would you fight for me, or for her?" I hated that question because it forced me to confront something I'd been avoiding. I didn't know the answer. My silence must have told her everything because she rolled onto her side, away from me. That was the first time I saw the shadow of jealousy cross her face. Clara wasn't content with just being the secret anymore. She wanted more time, more commitment, more of me. And the terrifying part, I wanted to give it to her, even though I knew it would destroy everything else in my life. At the office, her behavior began to shift. She wasn't careless, but she was bolder. She lingered in my office longer than before, laughed a little too freely at my jokes, touched my arm when handing me papers even when others were around. Nothing obvious, but enough to make me nervous. One day, during a staff meeting, one of my colleagues joked about how close Clara and I seemed. The room erupted in laughter, but my chest tightened. I caught Clara's eye, and instead of looking embarrassed, she smiled, a smile that was equal parts daring and proud. That night, I confronted her. "You have to be more careful," I warned. "People notice things." She crossed her arms, clearly irritated. "What are you so afraid of? That someone will figure out you're not happy at home. That they'll see the truth." "Clara," I said firmly, "if my wife ever finds out." "She won't," she cut me off. "Unless you tell her." Her confidence both thrilled and unsettled me. She wasn't afraid of being discovered, at least not in the same way I was. For her, this affair was freedom, passion, and escape from loneliness. For me, it was all of that too, but it was also a ticking bomb, one mistake away from blowing up my life. Things came to a head one Friday night when my wife invited me to her sister's birthday dinner. I had already promised Clara we'd spend the evening together. When I told Clara I couldn't make it, she exploded. "You always choose her," she snapped. "You say you want me, but the moment she snaps her fingers, you run back like a loyal dog." Her words cut deep because they weren't entirely wrong. I tried to calm her down, but she was furious. She grabbed her purse and stormed out of my office, leaving me shaken. That night at dinner with my wife, I sat there smiling and making small talk, all while my phone buzzed with unread messages from Clara. Guilt gnawed at me, but so did anger. How had I let myself get into this position, torn between two women, both of whom had claims on me in very different ways? The following Monday, Clara came into work as if nothing had happened. She was professional, polite, efficient. But beneath that cool exterior, I could feel the distance. She avoided my gaze, spoke only when necessary, and didn't linger in my office once that entire day. It was torture. By Tuesday, I couldn't take it anymore. I called her into my office and closed the door. "Clara, talk to me," I pleaded. She looked at me, her eyes colder than I'd ever seen them. "I don't want to be your secret forever," she said. "I'm not built for that. If this is all we are, then maybe it's better if we stop." The thought of losing her hit me harder than I expected. I realized then that what we had wasn't just physical anymore. It was emotional. She had become part of my life in a way I couldn't just erase. "I don't want to stop," I admitted. "I can't." Her eyes softened, but only slightly. "Then figure out what you want, because I won't wait forever." From that day on, the affair shifted. It was no longer just about passion, it was about ownership, jealousy, and the unspoken tug of war between my marriage and my double life. Clara wanted more of me than I could give, and yet, I couldn't bear to let her go. I started lying more. Longer hours at the office, sudden, client meetings, unexplained absences. My wife noticed, of course. She asked questions, but I always had answers ready. And the frightening thing was, she seemed to accept them. Maybe she wanted to believe me. Maybe she didn't want to face the possibility that her husband was being unfaithful. But I knew I was playing with fire. Every lie was another spark, another chance for everything to ignite. And yet, even as the fear of being caught grew heavier, so did my hunger for Clara. By the end of the 4th month, what started as a thrilling adventure had transformed into something else entirely. It wasn't just about desire anymore. It was about control, about who I belonged to. About whether I was willing to risk everything for the woman who had become my obsession. And though I told myself I was still in control, deep down, I knew the truth, I was already hers. If you've read this far, you probably expect some grand ending. A dramatic discovery, a confrontation with my wife, a scandal that tore my family apart. But the truth is, none of that happened. I was never caught. My wife still doesn't know, at least not to my knowledge. Clara eventually moved on, though not in the way you might think. And I remain here, years later, telling this story anonymously, not to seek forgiveness, but to release the weight of it from my chest. The affair lasted almost a year. 12 months of secrets, lies, and moments of stolen passion that felt too good to give up. In that time, Clara and I built something that was both intoxicating and unsustainable. We laughed, we fought, we touched, we whispered promises we both knew we couldn't keep. We created a world of our own inside hotel rooms and locked offices, a world that ran parallel to my marriage, hidden in plain sight. And then, quietly, it ended. Not because of discovery, not because of guilt, though guilt always lingered like a shadow, but because reality eventually caught up with us. Clara started dating someone, a man her own age, single and free to give her everything I couldn't. At first, she didn't tell me. I noticed the signs. Her phone buzzing with messages she hid from me, the way she sometimes seemed distracted even when we were together. One night, after another heated argument about my inability to give her more, she confessed. "I met someone," she said softly, almost apologetically. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to be angry, but what right did I have? I was the married one. I was the one keeping her hidden in the shadows while I went home to my wife every night. And yet, the idea of her belonging to someone else, of her laughing and touching another man the way she had touched me, made me feel sick with jealousy. "Do you love him?" I asked. I don't know, she admitted. But he can give me something you can't, freedom. I didn't argue. Deep down, I knew she was right. What we had was beautiful in its own way, but it was also built on lies and limitations. I could never offer her more than fragments of myself, stolen hours between responsibilities. And Clara deserved more than fragments. Our affair ended that night, not with fireworks, but with silence. We sat together for a long time, neither of us speaking, both knowing this was the end. When she finally left, she kissed me one last time, a kiss that was softer, sadder, final. After she walked out of that hotel room, I never touched her again. But I saw her, of course. She was still my assistant, still walking into my office every morning with files and reports. At first, it was unbearable. I couldn't look at her without remembering what we had shared. But over time, the rawness faded. We slipped back into professionalism, into the roles we were always supposed to play. She stayed at the company for another year before moving on to a new job. By then, she was engaged to the man she had told me about. I congratulated her with a polite smile, as though I wasn't dying a little inside. That's the last time I saw her. So why am I telling this story now? Because secrets like mine don't disappear. They live inside you, quietly poisoning you from the inside out. On the surface, I am still the same man. I am still married, still working, still living the life everyone expects me to. But inside, I carry the ghost of Clara, the taste of her lips, the sound of her laughter, the feel of her skin against mine. Those things don't fade, they become part of you, for better or worse. Sometimes, when I lie in bed beside my wife, I wonder if she ever sensed it. Women have instincts sharper than we give them credit for. Maybe she noticed the late nights, the excuses, the way I sometimes came home smelling faintly of another perfume. Maybe she chose to ignore it, to preserve the life we had built. Or maybe she truly never suspected. I'll never know. What I do know is this: affairs are never just physical. They dig into your soul, rewriting the way you see yourself. Before Clara, I thought I was a faithful man. A good husband, even if not a passionate one. But the affair showed me another side of myself, selfish, reckless, hungry for validation. I became someone I swore I'd never be, and the truth is, part of me liked that version of myself too much to stop. Do I regret it? That's the question I wrestle with the most. The easy answer is yes. I regret betraying my wife, lying to her, and breaking the vows I once took seriously. I regret the nights I came home and kissed her goodnight with the taste of Clara still on my lips. I regret knowing that if she ever found out, it would shatter her world. But there's another truth, one harder to admit: I don't regret Clara. I don't regret the way she made me feel alive again, the way she reminded me I was more than just a husband, a father, a paycheck. With her, I rediscovered passion, intimacy, and a part of myself I thought had died years ago. And though it cost me a piece of my soul, I can't bring myself to wish it had never happened. That's why I remain anonymous. I'm not looking for sympathy. I don't need advice or judgment. I need only to release this story into the world, to let someone, anyone, know the truth I've carried for so long. Because carrying it alone is heavier than you can imagine. Even now, years later, I sometimes dream about her. In my dreams, we're back in that hotel room, the blinds drawn, the world outside forgotten. She smiles at me the way she used to, a smile that says I am wanted, desired, chosen. I wake up with my heart racing, and for a moment, I reach for her. But it's always my wife lying beside me. I roll over, close my eyes, and remind myself of the life I chose, the life I still live. But deep down, I know a part of me will always belong to Clara, even if no one else ever knows it. And so, this is my confession. My true infidelity story. Not a cautionary tale, not a glamorous fantasy, but the messy, complicated truth of a man who cheated on his wife with his assistant and never got caught. This is why I am anonymous. This is why I will never speak these words out loud. Because sometimes, the most dangerous secrets are the ones that never see the light of day. This was not just a tale of lust, it was a confession of how a single choice can unravel years of trust. I cheated on my husband with my personal assistant, and though he never found out, the weight of that secret still lives inside me. On the surface, my marriage looks intact, but deep down, I know it was forever changed the moment I crossed that line. The affair gave me passion and escape, but it also left me with guilt and questions I can't fully answer. I learned that infidelity doesn't always end in discovery, sometimes it ends in silence, leaving you to carry the burden alone. That is why I remain anonymous, sharing this only as a warning, a reflection, and a release. In the end, I was never caught. My husband still believes in my loyalty. But I know the truth. And living with that truth is its own kind of punishment. And that's where my story ends, not with exposure, but with silence. My wife still doesn't know, and maybe she never will. But secrets like these never really stay buried inside you. They live, they breathe, and they shape the person you become. If you've ever carried a secret like mine, you know exactly what I mean. If this story gripped you, make sure you subscribe and follow, because more untold true confessions and infidelity stories are coming. Don't miss what's next.